welcome everyone, anyone listening now or in the future. Today we are going to be talking to somebody I met from TikTok, goes by the name Controlled Opposition Parties. Sort of got involved in some of my videos as I've been critiquing kind of like the MAGA movement or Trump, everything else. So we'll see. It'll be kind of an interesting discussion. I actually think we probably agree on a lot of things, and that's the goal at the end of this show is to find what we can agree on, even if we weed through the disagreements. Real quick, just want a friendly reminder to everybody to join the Discord if you enjoy having discussions. That's kind of the primary goal of the Discord, is try to foster a community of people that no matter the disagreements, we can try to at least attempt some common ground and at the end of the day see each other as fellow human beings. So with that being said, Controlled Opposition, do you want to just, I guess, give as much of a background or intro as you want, and especially what you like to talk about on TikTok?
So my background, so I will give partial background of my personal life. Maybe not that much, but I grew up Mormon. I lived in a conservative state. I've lived in mostly conservative states, and I basically deconstructed from the age of 12 on, and um, yeah, started fighting for indigenous communities and also marginalized communities. And um, let's see what else. I would consider myself a Marxist, an anarchist, and a communist. I believe in pretty much all three of those are good. Socialism too. So I mean, I don't know. Like I'm pretty open minded when it comes to left wing ideologies. So yeah.
Okay. And then I guess before I ask some questions, is that mostly what you talk about on your channel, is just sort of like left-wing ideas or marginalized communities, things like that? Working class, I would imagine.
Working class, a lot of working class. Talk about the Black Panthers, patriarchy, marginalized communities. Yeah. I also go into depth, like if anybody's followed me from the past, ever since 2019, I also do a lot of deconstruction as well. I'm friends with quite a few deconstructionists on TikTok, mutuals with them. And one of them is actually Tax the Churches. She focuses on Ashra and El and Christianity, and how Christianity is divorced from its original ideology, and also where Christians and Christianity has um, gone from its original religion, which was Canaanite, to this imperialist structure that has nothing to do with its original teachings, as well as the fact that they really don't identify with Jesus anymore. They're more focused on capitalism and so on and so forth. So she touches on that, and I used to. I did quite a few videos when I first started.
Yeah, cool. That's most of my content is also about religion, God, deconstruction, stuff like that. Even on the YouTube channel, most of the streams I've had have been talking to Christians or believers of different types. Um, just more recently have been trying to get more into talking about politics because obviously that's the more it's hard because they're obviously tied, and so I originally was like, if I can try to confront the religious aspect, that's going to echo down into cultural political stuff. um but obviously I think it's more dire now to talk about political stuff, and maybe both, all of it at once. But anyway, yeah, my journey feels a bit similar to yours, and I wonder if we're even from the same state. but I don't want to get too detailed. Sounds like you kind of want to stay a bit private, which makes sense. One thing I wanted to ask, so to you, what exactly is the difference between Marxism and communism?
Um, so Marxism, there's there's a few differences, but primarily it seems mostly ideological. It's not there's not a lot of contrast. They pretty much parallel. Same with socialism, and they're all derived from socialism. Like if you look at the founding of socialism right after the French Revolution, that's the entire point of socialism, communism, and Marxism was about economic freedom because the people that were fighting the freedom for freedom during the French Revolution understood that the kings were basically controlling their lives with finances and land and what they're doing today, like
Yeah,
really what they're doing today.
right. Um, I think it's good to try and, I guess, define our terms in the modern era, right? Because I agree. I mean, especially Marxism, communism, they can sort of be one and the same. Um, but the way our political terminology has been thrown around lately, I mean, even the way the right wing just talks about liberals in the same camp as like leftists or progressives or whatever, and it's not all the same. And so for me, and some may say I'm not a Marxist or I'm a bad Marxist, even though I might consider myself one. But the difference why I wouldn't call myself a communist is because I don't think insurgency or like revolution is a good outcome or good solution to the system. Essentially, being a Marxist to me means political revolution, working class revolution, in the sense of just like, um, I guess, taking over institutions and laws and whatnot, like rather than insurgency or violent overthrow.
So Marxism is a scientific and philosophical and political um, philosophy of dialectical materialism, which is
Mhm.
basically outlined by Marx, and it is the scientific study of dialectical materialism. So the materialism of the real reality, the real world. How does that affect you? And so that is the definition of Marxism. The definition of socialism is the economic liberation of the people, the masses, the working class. That is literally the definition of socialism. It's a liberation of the working class and them owning the means of production, or the production, of course, being the, you know, all the tools of production, which is the um, the farms, etc., all the larger installations. So we're looking at corporations like Tyson running chicken and all the chicken and meat production. That's the means of production.
Yep.
Steel mills, all of those are owned by capitalists, and that is the essential focus of socialism. So this is how they all intertwined and are intersectional. Communism is the belief of a classless, stateless, moneyless society. And that's the end goal of anarchism. So anarchism is, of course, the desired state of the world, which is where everybody basically functions in a more holistic, communal, and community based approach, and that the government is based by a proletarian dictatorship, or the people, being the proletariat, running the world rather than any governments or any people ruling over us. We rule ourselves. We have self determination and bodily autonomy. And if you look at indigenous tribes, this is the way that we actually used to live. So anarchy, socialism, communism, and Marxism is actually us going back to a more holistic existence, the way that we actually used to exist, and maybe using the technology that we've developed to make it easier.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit because I do think in our modern politics, terms just get thrown around, and like I said, even just like classical liberals might end up getting tossed in with the left. Although in the U.S., a classical liberal is probably considered more right wing. We're just our window is like pretty shifted to the right, I feel like. So even something that's like center left might be actually center in some other European countries and whatnot. Um, what are your thoughts on like it's kind of a newer thing that's been thrown around, market socialism, in the sense that we could keep some of the free market open just so long as the ways of living, everything that's directly associated with living in our lives, such as land, food, healthcare, um, housing, whatever. I would put education in there. Things like this should all be social and public, but that we can also allow a free market to exist side by side.
So the definition, let's look up the definition of free market. According to Merriam-Webster, an economic system in which prices are based on competition among private businesses and are not controlled or regulated by the government.
Right.
That's free market. So
Right.
in other words, it's controlled. That's an oligarchy. It being controlled by the corporations and their thoughts on what value is dictated is a free market. So when people say the free market capitalism, they're literally pro-capitalist, because free market is a free market for only the capitalists. Doesn't mean a free market for everybody, and that's the reason why they use these terms. And this is very important: is that our literacy in America is intentionally destroyed because they don't want us to utilize. Here's the thing: when you go to a court and you get a lawyer to defend you, whether you have a speeding ticket or you have a civil case and you're trying to sue someone, the lawyer understands Latin. He understands Latin because our laws are based on Latin, because we actually derive from Rome. Like we are a colony of Rome. Like that's historical. And same with medicine. It's based in Latin terms. The laws, our laws are based in Latin. Our regulations are based in Latin. So everything's based in Latin. So if you don't understand, that's the reason why they stopped teaching children Latin in the 1800s. They took that out of classrooms. Why? Because if you don't know what words mean and what they legally mean, or what the connotation of something is, then what power do you have? And that's the point. So the Black Panthers were amazing in their education system. What they were doing is they were not only teaching, Marxist Leninism, so communism, and Maoist Marxism, which is what Lenin was based on. Lenin and Mao were actually based in Marxism. They were Marxists.
Mm-hmm.
And so Marxism, of course, being the idea of philosophy, which you can basically gain a perspective of how to fix things. So once you get a scientific perspective and you can be like, okay, this is what's going on materially, how can we change it? That's the reason why they studied Marx. So the Black Panthers had an education system where they would actually teach children language. They would show them what words mean. And one of the biggest deceptions of our country is that's what they do constantly, is deceive people and tell, like, if you look at the news, they will show you to your face what they're doing and what they're saying, but you don't know because you don't speak Latin. You don't American. So like the English language is based off of Germanic, so Anglo-Saxon. It's Anglicized Latin and French and Old French. So if you look at the word capitalism, for instance, capitalism is derived from the word, and I don't know if you've seen this video. I've done it probably 1,000 times over the past 5 years. The root word for capital or capitalism is caput, C-A-P-U-T, which literally it means in Latin head. But the context of what a head is within Latin is a head of cattle. So when they were saying it's a head, they're not talking about your head. They're not talking about the head of leadership. They're talking about a head of cattle. So, and cattle is literally the anglicized word of capital. So cattle literally means capital.
Mm-hmm.
Capitalist, which is of course the where Marx actually wrote his book, his 2-volume book about capital. It's Das Kapital. It literally is what he's talking about. And capitalism is all about the ownership of cattle. And so when an economist gets on the news and says, it talks about capital or human capital, he's talking about the employees of the employer. And that is why, is because they're literally calling us human cattle.
It's like the labor force.
Yeah. Capitalism is slavery, literally. It's what America was founded on, and Britain was gaining its wealth in. In fact, in the 1600s, or yeah, the 16th century, Britain was the top slave trade. Before that, it was Rome. And guess what Britain, the country of Britain actually is? The country of Britain is it's a colony of Rome, just like all the other European countries. And who were the kings? They were basically married into the house, the Roman emperor's house. So all of those royalty, all the royalty that ran the feudal system were Roman blood, royal blood. So you have this language that people don't understand because they aren't taught Latin. And then that is the confusion when it comes to communism and capitalism. People are told that capitalism is actually freedom. And when someone describes communism, they refer to capital or capitalism. And when someone describes capitalism, they're like, oh, that's communism, because they don't know what words mean. And it's not because they're stupid. It's because they're completely, number one, indoctrinated, propagandized. And 3 is because they're intentionally uneducated. So,
So
yeah.
just to clear it up a little bit here, it sounds like, I mean, it's not that you're opposed to markets per se. It's just like free markets or whatever. You're just saying the way the words have been used is like a psyop, essentially. Like, this
Exactly.
is the free way, the free market, anyone can come make themselves here, right? Whatever. All the propaganda they use to like sell that point. But markets themselves, and so going back to like the market socialism aspect, essentially you would be okay with markets so long as laborers aren't alienated from their labor, I would imagine, right? So if we're in this market where I'm producing my labor of my own volition, my own autonomy, because I want to, and then I'm like selling it in the market. So it, right? Like, it's not that you're just opposed to markets, right?
Well, that's commerce, and that's where a lot of Americans get conflate capitalism with markets and commerce. So markets and commerce have existed forever. In fact, the indigenous tribes in Turtle Island and all over the world, in Africa, there were many markets, and even in Russia during the Communist Party, like there were markets. And most people don't understand this, but they're actually small businesses that were thrived under communism. But you talk to an American who is drenched in Red Scare propaganda and Pink Scare
Mm-hmm.
propaganda against communism, and they will believe that it is what communism is, according to America is exactly the definition of capitalism, that one person controls everything and they basically steal from you. That's capitalism. That is literally what happens under capitalism. A corporation basically forces you to work for them under coercion, and then you have to decide between which exploiter to work for, and you basically give all of your profit, all of your worth to them, and then they give you a pittance. They give you a little tiny bit just to eat. That's capitalism. Whereas
Yep.
under communism, like you basically get the value of all of what you work for. But that's during the 80s and during the Cold War, that's what they sold America as, what that's what communism was, while literally enacting capitalism and what people hate communism for in America. That's what they were instilling in America during the 80s and the 90s and the 70s. But that's that's what they attribute to communism when that's not the case.
Right.
And the definition of communism is based around community. So the Latin word for actually comes from the old French and the Latin word of commune, right?
Hmm.
Common. So common law is also derived from that. So you hear a lot of Trump supporters talking about common law. Well, do you know why Britain established common law? It was because they were revolting, and all the revolutions were happening in the 1700s. They had to do something about that because all of the kingdoms were like, shit, all of our people are revolting because they realize that the king doesn't have a divine right to rule. So we need to do something about it. So they created within the parliament, they created the House of the Commons, and they created common law. So people could have some outlet. And that's what neoliberalism is. That's what liberalism is. So the whole reason why liberalism was started in America is to give the working class an outlet. And neoliberalism was actually loyal to the crown. So the two philosophers that started liberalism, if you look them up, John Locke and
Hmm.
Thomas Hobbes, were both loyal to the crown. They were loyalists to royalty, and they were not about freedom. But you have all of these patriots who talk about, well, Thomas Hobbes and freedom and individual freedom and states' rights.
Hmm.
They're quoting a loyalist to tyranny. Those two philosophers are actually loyalists to tyranny and feudalism, not liberty. And that's the point. And that's where
Yep.
liberalism actually derived from. Classical liberalism was created by those two guys.
Well, and it was liberalism for the quote citizen, right? Which back then meant the white male owned property owning person, right? So it was like this sold idea of freedom for the brotherhood. We can go to this new place, and rather than have a crown, we have all of us brothers who are like the authority, this fraternity of people. We get the freedom because we're the citizens. We have the stakes in the society, but like, you know, those colored people, those women, everyone else, they're not a citizen. And I also wanted to add with John Locke, like his liberalism essentially, like the argument he made for it was an infinite accumulation of wealth, because anything that he made the argument that property is whatever, whenever someone adds labor to the natural world. For instance, if I go pick an apple, like I'm putting my labor onto that. But but that mode of existing, if you pick too many apples, they'll rot, and that's like a waste. So then he like fills in currency instead of apples, and he's like, this is how you can just infinitely accumulate, because the currency doesn't rot. So that's like the economic liberalism, and what I had have a problem with essentially is that this infinite accumulation of wealth rather than like just sort of building what you need. I do want to say though, like there are a lot of liberal philosophy that do think are good, and this is part of what I hate about the terms and how they get used. like just philosophically, not economically, I do think liberalism is good because essentially that's just the right to express, live how you want, right?
So actually, so here's the thing with liberalism is about individual freedom over the masses. So it's basically pitting the individual against the masses. And this is actually stemmed from Protestantism and the Calvinism and puritanical ideas. And this is why you get a lot of Republicans that are like, well, if you don't work hard enough, then God won't favor fortune upon you.
Hmm.
It's it's about this ideology that if you don't work hard enough, that's where that ideology comes from. Is if
Yeah.
you don't work hard enough, you don't deserve anything, because it goes back to that same ideology that God has smiled down upon the royals and given them divine right to rule. It's the same ideology. So what you're talking about is, this is why I'm talking about language, because when we talk to the general public in America, when we say liberal, they think they don't really think about economics, because if you talk to a Trump supporter or a Republican, they'll say that Republicans are much more fiscally sound than Democrats. That's all they'll bring up about um, economics with liberalism. But they won't go back to the origins of liberalism and understand that liberalism was about um, basically forgiving the king economically, because if you own property, right, then you deserve it. So think about this for a second. So back in the day, during feudal period, the king had the right to rule because he was related to Jesus, because he was related to gods, right? Same with
Hmm.
the emperor. He was related to Zeus, therefore he had the right to rule. So when the people started being like, no, that's stupid, like it doesn't matter, we're all Christian now, like we have the right to be independent. And Jesus said, hey, like split a log and I'll be there. Like started realizing that he was actually for bodily autonomy and self-determination and so on and so forth. So the king, and especially John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, is like, well, shit, we can't control them anymore. So what we can do is put everything in property. We can basically say property has value. And because I am divinely given by God to own this property, like I'm fortunate enough to work hard enough, then I have a right to basically rule. And that is the where we get the whole origins, where the founding fathers deceived the American people and the farmers and were like, what value you have should be in property. And the Native Americans were like, you guys are crazy. Like literally they called them insane, because they're like, nobody can own land. Nobody can
Hmm.
own the land. Like
Right.
it's everybody's to share,
Yeah.
because you cannot possess something that is not possible to possess. Um, and so that's where we get this ideology of property. And it
Right.
comes from Calvinism in the 1500s. And that is where capitalism started in the 16th century, is this idea of property.
So yeah, I'm with you on all the property stuff, by the way. And like I've also dug into native philosophies and whatnot, and so I definitely understand the land arguments and the historical analysis here you're giving about Locke and Hobbes. Um, One place I do think I disagree a bit though is how do I put it? This idea that the collective is more important than the individual. And just let me break it down a little bit, because it's not that I think the individual is more important than the collective. For me, it's a reciprocal nature. The individual is important because of the collective, and vice versa. Like for me, you can't actually have a good collective unless the individual is liberated and autonomous as well.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying, is it's intersectional. So liberty comes from having your own bodily autonomy. and self-determination. But you cannot have either. That's what I'm saying, is that they created this delusion of freedom by making it all about freedom for the individual, and then taking away the rights of the masses, and then selling it back to them so that nobody was free. um, and that's what I'm talking about, is that individual freedom and community freedom is just as important, and both actually grow from each other. And that
Right.
is the Native American wisdom, is that when you are free, you will want to make sure that everybody around you has the same amount of freedom. It's reciprocity. Like
Right.
if you actually look into the indigenous philosophies and laws, everything centers around reciprocity.
Right.
And
That's why
that,
I specifically use that word, because yeah, and it's a big word. Like it's how I talk about any relations, because to me relations are literally quite like, even from a scientific like physics level, everything is in relation, right? And I see you have a Buddhist thing there, so I'm sure you understand this point, that literally everything originates from just relations, with not quite everything else. I don't know, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say. So yeah, and that's exactly what I was trying to get at, is that the individual versus the community, it's not like one is more important than the other. It's just that they're reciprocal. But you can have communities, collective communities, where individuals are oppressed, but that could be better for the collective. Like, even just an example of slavery, you could have the majority of the collective be benefiting in some way, right? But you're oppressing individuals in order to get that outcome. So I think the two just have to be like perfectly reciprocal.
and there has to be balance. That's the whole point, is there's a balance that Native Americans, and this is why they attack indigenous communities, and why the empire is so violent against communities, is indigenous communities, is because their philosophy, their laws base around a balance between the individual freedom and bodily autonomy, and the community's freedom and its bodily autonomy as the masses. And that's what they don't want, is because that goes back to classical liberalism, is because if you look at how the king, because he has all this property, and this is the ideology that Chad Bros and all of these capitalists, pro-capitalist
Chad
people
Bros.
talk about, is that if you if you basically have the capital, right, which is of course the financial backing of all these slaves that you own, basically as employees, that's what it comes down to, is these slaves, these wage slaves, are your employees, and you're basically backing the finances with that. You can basically get a loan. You can use that capital and leverage it, which is basically slaves. And the first thing that was sold in America were slaves at Wall Street. The Wall Street, that's why they have a wall in the street, is it was this wall separating slaves from the slave owners. The first thing sold were slaves. And that's why the Revolutionary War actually happened, is because the founding fathers didn't, they wanted to cross over the, it's a certain line. Let me try to remember what it's called. It's the proclamation line. The proclamation line is where the king proclaimed that the settlers couldn't cross over into the indigenous territory, and they wanted to cross over that. They also wanted to continue slavery, which England was like, we need to back up because we're actually having all these revolts against us. We need to back off slavery and selling as many people, because we're going to be overthrown by the masses and the slave revolts. So, and America's like, no, we'll take over the slave trade for you. And so the Revolutionary War was based on that. It wasn't based on taxes. It wasn't based on religious freedom. Yeah, like the Puritans, like we get this idea because that's how America positions the Revolutionary War. But the Puritans were hated by England. Like the English were extremely right wing, conservative Christians, but the Puritans were worse. They were like the jihad of Britain. They literally, were the worst. Like they were, yeah, they were completely, based around
Where they
fundamental.
were burning women at the
Yeah,
burning witches, right? Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
they were the extremist fundamentals
Yeah.
of Christianity, and so
Um. Oh, sorry. Did you want to finish?
yeah, and so that's those are part of the people that actually came over to America, and the other ones were, the rich and the, cousins of the king and so on and so forth that wanted to
Mhm.
expand their holdings outside of the country. Like every president was related to King George, so or was it no, sorry, King John. So literally, they were related to royalty, and they're like, you know what, we want to be able to expand our holdings outside of Britain and we want to control it and make money off of it, where our cousins are making money off of all this other exploitation of the global south. And so that's what the Revolutionary War was fought over. And the truth is that they didn't win the war. They formed a treaty. There's a treaty in the, like if you go to the Library of Congress, there's actually a treaty with Britain. Like they didn't lose the war, that we just made a deal with them.
Well, I definitely appreciate all your historical analysis. Like, you can tell when someone's a good Marxist if they can lay out all this shit to you. Um, so the okay, I kind of want to save the final. The whole point of this is sort of to get to the two parties, right? And the controlled opposition. But I kind of want to maybe go through some other things first. Um, and I'm curious how you would respond to like very small business owners who become very successful. Um, you know, whether that's black business owners or women business owners, right? Who they do sort of take our propaganda at its word and say, okay, they're telling me I can make a life for myself by like gaining my own capital, starting my own business. They take the risk, they do it, and then, like I said, they become very successful. They can support their family, their communities, all these things um, end up becoming, you know, this what I would call in the US this sort of upper middle class. That not it's not quite the middle class, but it's not also the like billionaires, right? There's sort of this in between. Um, so yeah, I don't myself personally don't really know how you can combat these success stories by saying, well, you're just using slave labor and that's why you're so successful. Um, and but they're also not these like elite, evil, corrupt capital owners. They're just actually like hard working families that build a business. I'm wondering how you might approach talking to people like that.
Well, black capitalism, gay capitalism, women capitalism, feminist capitalism, all it is basically capitalism rebranded, and that goes into liberalism. So the early founding fathers started liberalism. It was to rebrand. That's what I'm saying early, is it was to rebrand the king's position of power. Rather than feudalism, it's now, oh well, he's liberated because he has all this wealth and property. If you want to be liberated like him, you have to now exploit all the people in Turtle Island, take it over and exploit whoever you can. It goes back to the founding of America. The founding fathers created this ideology, and black capitalism is exactly that. It's the, American dream, to exploit others, to basically take, a part of the pie. But the truth is that even the middle class cannot be capitalist, because capitalists have to own the means of production. So if you are a capitalist and you're making a few $1 million because you're exploiting, like, say, 1,000 people at a burger joint, you don't own the means of production. Who does?
Mm.
BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, all the ones who own all the houses, own all the shares, and all the other corporations who actually own the means of production. So that,
Okay, so you would still put even successful small business owners essentially in the working class and not in capital owners.
yes, because
Okay.
small businesses are working class. They're not capitalists. And that's another lie that the um, American capitalism has created, like this ideology of America and meritocracy. Meritocracy does not exist. It's just sold to the American public so that they're distracted from the fact that the king still owns all the land. There's still landlords. That's why they use all the same terminology. That's why I brought up capital as being a Latin and legal term of slavery. Like that is the legal term of slavery. When they call you the capitalists, that means that they're the owners of capital. And when they call you capital, they're saying legally you are property. So here's the thing: people have now found out that cops only protect property of the rich, of the capitalist class. So what is the property of the capitalist class? People, the capital.
Hmm.
They're protecting property, and that includes the property in which they've taken over and stolen land, but also the capital. And who is the capital? The employees. That's the reason why we are basically over policed, and the rich are not. The rich aren't even policed. Why?
Right.
Because they're not. It's kind of like a rancher. Why would a rancher go into a a rich um, owner of cattle and go into his family's backyard and start policing his children? That's not his job. A rancher goes and polices the cattle.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, just to fine to it and make it super clear. So let's say I start like a construction business, right? In the sense I purchase all my own tools. Um, and let's say it's just me for now. I just do the labor. I don't hire out my labor. Um, s- yeah, I mean it's tough because likely I'd have to get a loan. And if I get a loan already, right, that's me borrowing capital from the actual capital owners. So I guess you would probably still include me in the working class in that scenario, right? Even if I owned like all my tools and all this stuff, I still probably have a business loan that I'm paying off. So really, I'm just a slave to whoever loaned me that capital. Um, but I guess if I got to the point where I paid off the loan and I just now I do own all the tools, all my own means, what does that make me? Does it just make me a free laborer and not exactly a capital owner?
If it's just you and no one else, then yeah. If you so and
That's
this
like the
is
peak form of labor right there.
Yeah. So if you are a person who is trying to resist capital and being a system for the slave owners, all you like, for instance, if you have a, this is where a lot of socialists come up with um, small businesses where it's communal or they basically have the same pay. So the owner gets the same pay as all the other employees because the point of actually working is to put in your labor. So let's say that you have like 1,000 employees and you are like you have $1 million, $2 million, and all of these employees, right? And you're just trying to put it back into the business. You're not trying to become a capitalist and own the people or own the money, which isn't capital, by the way. Um, so and basically hoarding wealth, which of course wealth comes from capital, which is the people, the laborers. So basically, if you're getting the same salary, right, as your other employees, you guys are equal. So you're only getting what you are actually putting into the business. And all of the rest of them are also getting the same amount of work that they put into the business. There's no need for you to hoard any of their labor value and keep it for yourself because that would be unfair.
That's like
You,
a co-op at that point.
yeah, exactly. but that's a socialist mode of labor or small business in this capital system. But even in communism, that would exist there. It would be more co-op based, where everybody's getting the same salary and they're getting the same value, because they should get the value of what their labor is put in. They shouldn't be exploited and taken of stolen from by the person who supposedly put the effort into exploiting them. That's what it really comes down to: is a capitalist has all this wealth,
Hmm.
right? So just because he has all this wealth gives him the right to basically exploit 100,000 workers, like Bezos. Doesn't he have 100,000? I think it's 150,000. But does he
Yeah.
have the right to exploit their labor? No, he doesn't. Just because he has hoarded the wealth that his dad basically helped him start, which his dad got from hoarding of wealth, and his dad before him were all related to royalty. So
Yeah.
if you look into the history of all these billionaires, they're related to royalty or aristocracy. They got their wealth from somewhere, and usually it's from royalty or exploitation or both.
So, I let's go back to what you might like say to a small business owner, or sort of in attempts to critique them to maybe change their lifestyle or join forces with the working class, right? And let's just go back again to the example of me like starting the construction business, but say this time I like hire a few laborers, right? Now I have capital and I'm utilizing their wages in an unfair way. Um, this is where, because I can tell from the way your videos and a lot of comments you've made, like your goal seems to be a somewhat of a unification of the working class, whether that's a small business owner or someone like me who works a wage or whoever else, right? um so I don't think the rhetoric of telling small business owners that they actually just have slaves and they're oppressing their laborers, they're treating their laborers on poorly, is actually like, I don't think that's they're gonna hear that and be like, oh yeah, like I should just join the working class movement. So I'm just wondering like what a realistic approach to these people are, because again, a lot of people have these sort of stories of like not having the best life, but they got lucky with an investment here or there or whatever, then they were able to start this business and, say they treat their employees best they can, but they still obviously hoard more of the wealth because they're the CEO. Um, I want to know how we like thoughts on how we should actually approach these types of people, because the slave rhetoric I don't think is going to be successful.
um, by showing them that they themselves are tied to slavery. Like most Americans, when it comes to small business owners, you talk to all these people who view themselves as conservatives or maybe liberals, who are also, pro-capitalist. They see themselves as free. And what's the best way? Like if you look at the Matrix, what's the best way of waking a person up? To tell them the truth. That's not to say that, oh, you're a slave owner. Like it's to show them that they may view themselves as free, but this is because a lot of those people already have. They're starting to develop this distrust of, one, the government, and two, the corporations. So it's pretty easy to bring that up to them and be like, well, you know, you may think that it's okay to just go ahead and take all the profits, but wouldn't it be more fair and make it easier for you to fight back against those who are oppressing you by giving them a fair wage as as a person who runs a small business? And if you uplift them, then then there's going to be a lot more power for you to fight back against the larger corporations that you actually have to pay homage to. Because if you're a small business owner, your profits are actually going into their bank. And that's one thing that I always bring up with small business owners is that in some way you are affected by the corporations, and these larger corporations that basically have power over your small business, because your small business literally has to get some of the production, like means of production, or you have to get some of the products from these larger corporations.
Mhm.
You have to get loans, like you said, all of these other things that they basically have power over you. Land, you have to rent land, all of these things that they own, and hold over you as a small business owner. What if they weren't like a king or a landlord over you? Like, you'd be much
Yeah.
more free.
Okay.
So I
I think
focus
that's
on
fair.
freedom, because by exposing the rhetoric of freedom and how they're able to use doublespeak to confuse people into believing that slavery is freedom and war is peace and peace is war. It's 1984. They're literally controlling a language. And sorry, that's how I talk to most Trump supporters, and actually libertarians and conservatives.
Yeah.
I
No, that
use
makes sense. Well,
I use
um,
their language.
yeah, yeah, I think that's a good point, is trying your best to use their language. And um, yeah. Anyway, so I think this is a nice transition into like kind of the whole reason behind this stream today. Um, because you talked a lot about like mistrusting of the government and like how people are starting to do that, right? Um, and mistrusting, of course, I would argue the left and even a lot of liberal Democrats who vote Democrat have for a long time been very skeptical of corporations, right? Maybe not as skeptical of like the government, but eat the rich has been a slogan for a while, and it's not just in leftist or progressive circles, but it's also in more the just kind of like Democrat liberals as well. Um, so the problem that I see with MAGA and Trump is that it's using genuine grievances and legitimate grievances to enact a faux revolution, which is actually designed to preserve and actually intensify slave relations. Um, this is why I'm very critical of the movement more than I am of Democrats, right? And it's not that, oh, I'm just like a lifelong Democrat, like I'm just love the party, love the DNC, like they're all great. Obviously, the DNC is an institution, a capital, like they're the same. They're both pro capital parties, and I understand that. Um, but when it comes to a faux revolution, let me put it this way. There of the two parties, it seems like our shared goals, and I don't know if they're all shared, but for me, the working class goals would be easier to achieve through one of these parties. Whether I support them fully or not, my goals, working class people's goals, seemed much easier to achieve through one of them.
So neither party, because what you're talking about with the faux revolution is exactly the same thing as Bernie and AOC, and the faux revolution with the Democrats, because both parties are controlled opposition for their opposition. They're literally controlled opposition. So with with liberals, they tokenize marginalized communities by using their identities to hide their economic strategy. And what Republicans do is they tokenize Christianity to hide their economic goals. Both are tokenizing something to hide their true intention, but they're tokenizing those groups to basically control the other side. And by creating this opposition, and controlled opposition, they can work together against both sides. That's the point. Is that libertarians and Trump supporters believe in Christianity, and they believe in all of these things that they've been fed since they were children, whether they're true or not, it doesn't matter. But all of these ideologies, like in the 1946, is when they actually created the term. They coined the phrase, um, against homosexuals is in 1946, they changed the translation in the Bible from arsenokoitai, which actually means pedophile, to mean homosexual, so that they could create a division. So every step of the way, both parties have created a division. In 1960s, when the civil rights movement happened, the Democrats decided to actually take the step and represent, falsely represent the marginalized communities. And we all know what happened in the 1950s and the 1960s with COINTELPRO, where the FBI and the CIA actually went into, well, it was the FBI, but because the CIA does this outside in other countries, but the FBI went into Black Panther and the civil rights movement, MLK and Malcolm X, infiltrated their parties and started destroying them from the inside. While that was happening, the Democrats started to pretend to be for those marginalized communities, women, the women's liberation movement, the gay liberation movement, Black people, and so that they could represent them politically and publicly and in the news. Well, guess what's happened since then? The Democrats have represented all of these marginalized people, but they've misrepresented them. They've misrepresented them to make them look bad publicly and in the news so that the Republicans can hate them even more. For instance, a great example of this is originally, let's see, Reagan was a Democrat and then he became a Republican, right? So it is this ideology of liberalism that everybody equates liberalism with marginalized people. But that's cultural liberalism. It's the idea
Right.
of liberal. So what is the definition of liberal or liberal? It's derived from libertas or liberty. But liberalism is not the same as liberty. Like you have to look into the words and their connotation, like their origins, to actually get an understanding of how they're using them. So most
Yeah,
people,
well, the other thing with that though too is that words do sort of evolve and change. Like, yes, looking at the etymology is good, um, but cultures influence word use and like, for example, the word cool, like that never meant like, oh, this is cool, right? That's just a cultural thing. Like we change how we use our words. And I understand from the top down with the media, maybe they're using it in specific ways to try and control us. But like that doesn't mean if I say like I'm a liberal, that doesn't mean I'm like I'm pro capital. That probably means I'm pro like people being able to be gay, people being able to have abortions. I'm pro the like like cultural liberal liberty, right?
well, that's why I bring up language and illiteracy in America. Like illiteracy isn't just that people can only read at a third grade reading level, which is like 60% of the country or something like that. I'm talking about actual literacy, which is understanding words. So when you're talking about cultural change, that's what I mean by cultural liberalism. Is it is literally encoded into the word culturally, but it's also individually. So when this is what happens when you're illiterate, for instance, and this is why, think about this for a second. So a lot of the terms that we get that are changed by the masses are usually changed by the poor and the illiterate. So, like back in the feudal times, when people would actually create different words that meant only something for their community, it's because they were actually part of that community. And that community was usually the serfs and the other people that the king wasn't part of. So what the king did is he actually had people go out amongst the commoners, right? And would learn their lingo so that they would understand us so that we could actually they could infiltrate. And this is back during the feudal times. Same thing is that today we don't have the king's English, and that's what they used to call it, the king's English, right? And so that use of the legal uh, framing or the royal framing of words, most Americans don't have that literacy, right? So they'll either look at a word and be like, okay, this is what it says in the dictionary, and this is what I think it means. This is my interpretation of the word. And so you'll have all of these people in America having a different interpretation of the same word, and that's what creates confusion and illiteracy in our country. And so everybody has their own language. They don't look at the dictionary and say, this is actually what the word means. And this is the etymology of the word. That's the deeper meaning, which is the legal meaning. This is what I understand the word to mean. And so it's a cultural understanding of the word. So
Right.
when Republicans and Trump supporters call Democrats communists, it's because they understand the word communism to mean capital, because that's what they have been indoctrinated and culturally indoctrinated to believe. So when liberals and Trump supporters agree as a body that liberalism means, oh, well, you're just woke, or you're just for, black people and gay people and all this other stuff, that's what they attribute to liberalism. But that's not the word. And
Yeah.
that's why we get so many people confused about politics, and that who wins when people don't understand words,
Yeah.
the ruling class, or I
Well,
should say
I
ruling
get
class.
I definitely get that point. I think that all I'm trying to say with the cultural language is that I think we generally should just try to take people for like just what they actually mean and not like what the root word is or whatever else, because obviously everything is just categorized. Like we've made up these categories, these labels to like talk about all these different things, but like if someone's just like, I'm a liberal, and you're like, what does that mean? And then they're like, oh, I think people should just like generally like have the freedom to live how they want. I think we should like raise minimum wage for the lowest working class because they are not having the freedom to live how they want, right? You might be like, okay, you're not a liberal, but like at that point, does the word matter so much as just the agreement, the ground that you found on agreement? Oh, so you're pro working class. That's great. So am I.
I think the word does matter because that's how they're able to control us. That's the point. Is
But you're
what
never going to win the propaganda war as the working class. That's kind of a problem.
I disagree with that, because it's all about language. So when you choose to educate yourself on words and laws and understand what laws mean, then you're able to have a lot more power to. The reason why this is important is because then you're able to have a point of reference of what the capitalists mean by that word, and then you can go to your fellow worker and be like, okay, so you say you're a libertarian, what does that mean to you? You say that you're a liberal, what does that mean to you? And then you could be like, oh, okay, so this is how we agree.
Hmm.
This is what the word actually means. And then we can actually come together and be like, oh, so that's how they're controlling us.
Yeah.
Educating more people on this word is very, very important. That's the reason why they don't want us to know these words. That's why we are illiterate as a nation.
Well, and that's fine. I'm not like opposed to you finding the common ground or whatever and then be like, by the way, this is like the history of liberalism and this is what it actually means. Like that's not what more for me. Well, first of all, there's a lot of baggage around communism after, you know, obviously all that you've explained about the Red Scare and everything else. Um, but it seems like before we can really educate people on the words, we have to find that agreement first. Because if they're just like, well, no, I don't care about X, Y, and Z, then it's like, okay, well, at that point, you just don't actually care. You're pro capitalism and pro slavery or whatever else. Um,
As it is your responsibility as an activist to learn these words, to learn language, and to also read theory. Now, when you read theory and understand where other people are coming from, you have the ability to actually communicate with their language. So if you understand libertarianism and you understand where conservative libertarians are coming from and communist libertarians, then you understand that when you talk to a person and say, hey, so where do you come from on this political viewpoint, on this economic issue, et cetera, you'd be like, oh, okay, so you believe that farmers should own they should own what they labor for. And you don't think that, and then they're going to come to you and be like, oh, free markets. And you'll be like, well, free markets. Yeah. Yeah. So what does free markets mean to you? You're basically educating them. It's like talking to a person who is illiterate. That's not their fault. I'm not being a classist. It's not their fault. They were uneducated on purpose. One of my favorite people in history is Thomas More. You should read Utopia. And one of my favorite is his quotes of his is that you first make thieves and then punish them. When he was talking to the king, and that's their intention, is they create these people who don't understand words, and then they punish them for it. So it's kind of your responsibility to become more literate so that you can basically come as a emissary to the rest of American people and decipher and translate their language. So it's all
Well,
about
that. I mean, that's fine. Like, again, I'm not opposed to like me as an activist better educating myself on the words and then being able to have that dialogue with people, or like you as an activist doing that, right? It's more so just here's the real problem, right? The working class people in the lowest brackets of our country, they like they aren't thinking twice about being an activist or educating themselves. So it's almost like it's a big ask to be like, hey, you wage laborer, go like learn about these words. They might struggle reading. Like legitimately, they're working for the lowest minimum wage possible. So it's just for me, that's where I have this hang up of like, well, you need to learn X, Y, and Z, and let me tell you all about it. At that point, to me, it just becomes like, okay, sounds like you want better pay for you and like your laborers. Like, I agree with you there. Like, the categories on some level aren't gonna matter as much as just the agreements themselves.
So it's really important to look at what the Black Panthers were doing. They were educating, they were creating like actual schools for people who think about this for a second. Back then, Black people were not just like illiterate in the sense that they didn't understand words, they were literally illiterate. They
Yeah.
couldn't read. There was a lot of them that couldn't read because they were in poor families. Um, like racism was much more outward, not just political, and yeah, it was a lot more overt rather than
Right.
covert with liberalism taking over. It was much more covert, and so they didn't understand not just words, they couldn't read. So what the Black Panthers did is they started education systems so that they could teach them not only how to read but how to understand the words. So that's our responsibility, is to create, if um, the Republicans and Democrats are going to take away education completely, then we have to basically form education for our society. We have to pick up where the government is intentionally trying to harm society. That's our responsibility. That's where praxis comes in, is to actually feed the homeless, feed the people, show them how to farm, show them indigenous tactics of how guerrilla gardening and permaculture gardening so that they can eat. Like show them how to utilize the law in their favor. These are our responsibilities to teach the masses how to do it. And the best way to do that is to actually communicate with your neighbors and people that you don't even know that are Republican. That's why it really pisses me off that liberals are attacking Republicans and being classist towards them, because you're basically creating a blockade, and that's what they want, a blockade for people to not actually have a conversation with each other. By
Well,
calling Trump supporters calling all liberals pedophiles, and liberals calling them uneducated hicks, is
mhm.
creating a barrier. for them to
Right.
actually work together as a working class to overthrow the capitalist.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're lumping me in with that, but I do want to just tell you, like, the reason I talk about it, even though I am critical of the MAGA movement, is to open the door for discussion, right? Because I'm not trying to just be like, oh, you're racist, I'm not going to talk to you. Oh, you're like an idiot, essentially, like, I'm not going to talk to you. The point for me is to try and talk to them more. That's like my whole thing is discourse and dialogue. So I hope you're not like lumping me in with this, like, just shutting down the conversation with the working class magas. um
Nope.
but I agree with you 100% on education, by the way. Like, I am huge, like, I think education's basically the number one pillar of any good society. Which is, again, why, like, I get, I truly get the both parties are pro capitalism. I really do. But, like, in your opinion, if Bernie Sanders had the faux revolution, do you think he would have gotten rid of education?
That's the goal of the Democrats and the Republicans, is to eliminate.
So where can you this is what I need backup on, because it's clear as day from the MAGA and Trump movement. It's not clear as day from someone like Bernie Sanders, who wants to make education free.
That's why it's controlled opposition. If you notice, so it's like bad cop, good cop. So if you notice that none of the all of the progressives in the Democratic Party are actually pro-capitalist, and even their ideologies, like AOC and Bernie Sanders, they voted for a lot of things that are actually very capitalist and very anti-worker. But um, the whole point of controlled opposition is to make you believe that somebody's fighting for you. That's the reason why Bernie Sanders was like, "Oh, I'm for this, I'm for that." Why did he not fight back when Biden just took the nomination from him? He just like, "Oh, whoops. Okay, you can have it. Just take it from me." It's the same thing with Trump and Kamala. It's like Trump is an easy person to defeat when you actually have true working class ideas, and ideas that will help the working class. She would have won in a landslide if she had like a tenth of the socialist ideas that most Americans, including Trump supporters, want. But
Yeah.
she didn't want, she actually doubled down on Trump policies because they don't want to help. That's the point. Is it's like bad cop, good cop. They pretend to be your friend so they can get you on their side, so that there is, that's what control opposition is. That's what the church, the Catholic Church, did when they were in charge of feudalism. Like, all of the kings were ran in Europe were ran by the papacy, but everybody's like, "Oh, well, that European country hates us." It's run by the same. It's run by the same organization, the papacy. That king is actually tied to the Pope. So you're telling me that that kingdom hates you and this kingdom hates you? When you guys, like, seriously, that's the point. They've been running this scam since feudalism. Literally controlled opposition is their plan to basically distract you from working together. That's why
Yeah.
I see
No,
you.
and I buy the overall point, right? I really do. But to me, it's not so cut and dry of like, oh, there's this like group of Illuminati who have like purposely put up these two parties and they're controlling every dictate that, like, to me it's all the capital. And there's multiple interest groups who are wealthy capital owners who are trying to have a sway. Um and it's hard for me to believe that one is not at least slightly better than the other when you look at progression. And we might just have a fundamental disagreement on how we want to overthrow capitalism, right? You might just be like, no, it requires like insurgency, complete overthrow now. Whereas I'm like, no, like someone like AOC's doing it correct. She's utilizing the actual laws in our system to try and change things from within, essentially being a conformist, right? Which I understand the critique. If you're a conformist, you you can get ultimately turned into like a believer of capitalism. But
Can I ask you
so
a
it
question
yeah,
when you're done? So could could you reform the mafia?
could I or
Could you,
like could people?
yeah, could the people reform the cartels?
Um I mean, the obvious answer is no, but
That's the point. We live in an oligarchy where both parties are pretending to fight against each other, but actually are working in tandem with each other. So if you notice, Republicans and Democrats get the same policies pushed. So when everybody was against funding the genocide in Palestine, and when everybody was against funding more wars, like both Republicans and Democrats were against funding more wars, AOC actually voted to increase the military budget. Why would she do that if she was anti capitalist? Why would she do that if she was like not even anti capitalist, but a moderate, which is actually a libertarian? Why would she do that? Well,
well, sorry, go ahead.
the reason why she would do that is because she actually works within the system. So people, I'm not, the whole thing that people get in their heads is conspiracy theory, right? And the reason why that is so ingrained in American society to mock someone who has it's like, do you know what is a conspiracy theory? Marx. That's a conspiracy theory. What is
Yeah.
a conspiracy theory? Well, guess who coined the phrase? CIA. Do you know why? Because it's to discount it. Because what is in the
Yeah.
word? Conspiracy and then theory. Theory is science. Conspiracy is a practice of conspiring against, right?
Hmm.
So the reason I bring that up is because a lot of people think anybody who is on the left that is not center right, which is Democrats, which are center right, anybody who is libertarians and left of the libertarians, which libertarians are center and right. Well, some of them are center left and center right, but libertarians are center. Anybody left of them is conspiracy theorists. Anybody right, like Trump supporters, are conspiracy theorists because they're talking about conspiracies. They're not
Yeah.
theorists. They're just talking about what really is going on in the country.
No,
That's
I get that. And I didn't even use the word conspiracy, right? I just made up the Illuminati thing because to me, like there absolutely are conspiracies, but it's just about wealth and capital.
that's
And
the
when
point.
I but that's why I'm saying I don't think it's like this hooded group of people sitting on top of Mount Olympus. I just think there's multiple interest groups, there's a bunch of moving parts, and it's not just like this group of one people essentially. That's all I was trying to say. But I mean, I agree with the conspiracy point. I used to sort of like mock any and every conspiracy, but I realized, like you just said, that yeah, like conspiracies are true sometimes and they're false sometimes. It's not like fair to just mock it because it's quote conspiracy. Like they come out to be true and false as much as any politician's words. Um, so yeah, I agree with that point. But I really want to go back to like this ultimate point I was trying to make. When you look at the history of our country and maybe you don't consider it progress because it's essentially just capitalism adapting and allowing for more people to become uh, wage laborers in but like things like unions, right? Workers unions is a huge one that like I feel like we as people can actually actively pursue and successfully pursue as working class people. Um, One party seems to have a history of trying, like maybe being resistant a little bit, but supporting unions way more than the other one. And in fact, and it's not just a Republican thing, but mostly the new like form of MAGA Republican, that they seem to have a plan to like eradicate a lot of workers unions protections and everything. And so it just it doesn't seem like each party equal. And I know you made the good cop bad cop thing, so like I guess what you're saying is that like they're allowing for these decades of what looks like maybe progress just to have a reactionary movement purposely pop up to come crush down these progressive movements, and it just cycles from there.
Yes, that's what they've done. That's what the king would do constantly. It's just a pattern within history. And the thing is that, like, regardless of what Trump supporters, what I find really interesting about QAnon is QAnon popped up when people started to, um, come out and in opposition to um, to the capitalist class. Why did it pop up? Well, it's a CIA op. That's the point. That's what a psyop is. Is they intentionally put true information out to the public so
Mm-hmm.
that the public can make all their own. It goes back to Babel, the Tower of Babel, right? And the whole language thing and illiteracy and not understanding what words mean is when you don't understand what words mean is you talk in Babel. That's why all these QAnon people seem like they're created their own version of the same story, and then everybody comes up with their own interpretation of what's really going on. But it all points back to the same conspiracy. So if you take down all of these like QAnon conspiracy theories and take them down to their root, all these people have the same story, which is that the capitalist class are controlling the media, the capitalist class is controlling the people, our food, etc., etc. That's what it comes down to. Churches are in charge, the government's in charge, and the capitalist class is in charge, the oligarchy. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's just reality. So the reason why there's so many different variations of this true reality that we all see is it goes down to language. Like we're literally babbling to each other. We're using our own words and our own interpretation of a word to get across what we're trying to say, but we're all saying the same thing.
Hmm.
That's the point.
Well, yeah. Uh, we can wrap up here in a little bit. And feel free, like, if you want to go down another line of thought or anything else. But I just want to sort of lay out. I think that maybe, and we could talk more again later if you want. I think maybe just our sort of fundamental differences in our positions. Uh, um, it's not that I'm like a conformist, right? I just like I think that essentially blood begets blood all into infinity, and it will never end unless we end it. And for me, a revolution, an overthrow of capitalism has to come through a social, political, economic reform rather than like an insurgency or people's revolution, or violent revolution, I should say. Um, but I think where we agree is obviously that capital's the enemy, right? But two, I think that we probably agree that where we can affect most change and where we really should start is just local communities. And like you were saying, educating sort of our communities how to farm ourselves, how to not rely on big daddy government for X, Y, and Z, but to just make our own communities flourish. And then if we have to resist against some type of military force because they're not liking how we're operating here, then okay, I understand resistance. um yeah, so I guess maybe what are your thoughts on that disagreement?
So I don't think you're. So the thing is that you're you're kind of concerned about, and it comes from what happened during the civil rights movement. During the civil rights movement, they saw all of these people were Black Panthers, the followers of Malcolm X. All of them had this rhetoric, and the reason why they focused mostly on MLK is because he was counter-revolutionary. He was counter-revolutionary because he was talking about reform, and you cannot reform a system that is working the way it's intended to work. So, like in feudalism, it was intended to work that way. Our system is intended to oppress people. That is our system. You cannot reform a system that works the way it's intended to work. And the reason that is because all the laws protect the system. All the laws protect the people who protect the system. The cops, the judges, they protect them. That's the truth. So when Malcolm X was saying, if a person puts his hand on you, obey the law, be kind, be generous. I'm trying to remember the quote. I love the quote. I have to look it up. But he basically said, if a person puts their hands on you, put them in the grave. What's funny is MLK at the end of his life realized that he was actually working for the system, that he was basically telling people to be peaceful while they were being brutalized, and that wasn't beneficial for them, because what does a dictatorship want? A dictatorship is a certain small group of people, an oligarchy, or even a dictatorship. What's the best thing for them? Subservient people that will just, try to reform the system or obey their master. So that is what they want. And Malcolm X realized that, and at the end of his life, in the letter to Birmingham jail, he actually was like, we need to violently revolt, before he was assassinated. And this is what Malcolm X said: be peaceful, be courteous, obey the law, respect everyone. But if someone puts their hands on you, send them to the cemetery. And that is the reality of our world, is that peaceful revolution is a misnomer. It's not possible. It's literally a contradiction. Same with it's like the 1984. It's controlled opposition. So here's the thing: like, when you go and protest, who's giving you permission to protest? The government, right? They're giving you permission to do what they want you to do.
Potentially not coming up here. There's already like laws in Texas they're trying to pass to like basically make organizers
Yep.
get into, yeah, so yeah,
that will increase the opportunity for the revolution to happen. The more that they control our food and take it away from us, our freedoms away from us, the more they're forcing our hands to actually enact a violent revolution. So
this is pretty funny. I tell my partner all the time, I'm pretty sure the farthest left Marxists probably voted for Trump because they know it will help their revolution, because the more they bring down the authoritarian hammer, the better we can justify an actual revolution.
But it's not justifying, it's resistance. And the thing is, like, for instance, what I find really interesting about Trump supporters, and I talk to them all the time about this, whenever I see a Trump supporter or Republican, I'm like, you believe in the Second Amendment, right? You believe in the First Amendment, and yet you believe that a cop has unlimited immunity to be able to shoot whoever they want.
Yeah.
That's not self-defense. Like, it's kind of like Israel and Palestine. They're constantly positioning themselves as if they have a right to self-defense, and you don't. So it's like American government. The police have a right to self-defense, but those who are resisting the police don't. But that's a lie. Everybody has a right to self-defense.
Well, I will say I do disagree that more political and peaceful reform can't happen, because, and I understand our country's a lot different. In fact, we utilized a lot more oppression to build our country, but there are many European countries who have given people free healthcare, free education, things like the things that affect our lives the most. Like, they are starting to reform these systems to be able to live in a healthier way, I guess I should say.
But the American government's not going to give that to us. And in fact, they're backtracking. So, like I said, George Carlin said, and there's he got it from I try to remember what philosopher, but you should read Gramsci, by the way, Antonio Gramsci. He was an Italian Marxist, but he's George Carlin said that the government doesn't give you rights; they take them away, and then leverage them back to you. I think he got that from another philosopher, but that's the whole point: is that they're taking away these
Right.
rights. They're
That's like what Hobbes's whole thing was, right? Yeah.
so as they take away our rights, why are they doing that? Like they could easily give us healthcare and they could give us all of this stuff that the European countries give their citizens. Why are they taking more of our rights away? And the thing is that guess what? In Europe, they're also doing the same. So why are all the capitalists all worldwide taking people's rights away? It's because they're getting ready for the revolutions, the worldwide revolutions. It's not just in America where there's going to be a revolution. It's going to be worldwide revolution, and it's going to be violent. And another quote from Malcolm X is he doesn't view it as like self-defense as violence. He says that he views self-defense as intelligence. It's not
Yeah.
violence.
Well, and I want to be very clear that I am on board with you in the self-defense thing, and obviously if the military is coming to our states to like control protests and what, like there is gonna at some point have to be some resistance and whatnot. Um, but I do think that it's essentially egged on by the fact that uh we've shown, I feel like we've shown on the left that we can't cooperate within the system. We're only here to fight, and so we've pushed them to the breaking point to now where they are just preparing to like beat down the revolution. And like, I'm sorry to say it, it's not that I just fear like facing the fucking US military. They will obliterate us. They have all the technology. Like, I don't see how you guys see hope in something like that.
Um, because of Vietnam and all of the guerrilla warfare. I mean, look at the Palestinian people. The Israeli occupation forces have the most advanced, and they are literally in a concentration camp, and they are still resisting in a concentration camp. They're in a concentration camp, and they're
Yeah.
resisting their oppressors who have the best military in the world and the backing of the United States and Britain and France,
They
and they
may
are
be resisting, but is it successful for them? I don't see their successful outcome in any way, shape, or form.
they are successful because look at what they in their sacrifice, what they have woken up the world to see. Now, the thing, it's the same thing with the Black Panthers. The Black Panthers died. They sacrificed themselves. They knew. Read Revolutionary Suicide. You really need to read Revolutionary Suicide by Huey Newton.
You're giving me a lot of reading lists.
Yeah. Oh, another one you should read is Franz Fanon, Wretched of
I
the
s-
Earth.
I still have to finish out school one semester. Can the revolution wait for one more semester?
But my point is that like the fear of the revolution is real. I get that, but you're not going to reform tyranny. You can't reform tyranny. It's not
Well,
possible.
and I want to be clear. It's not just like a fearful thing. Like it's not just because like I'm ready to do whatever it takes to protect my loved ones and myself, and right? It's not that like I can't get to that point. It's that I genuinely think it will be unsuccessful. Like the technology and the capacity that our and the fucking surveillance that our country has, I just I don't even see how you could strategize on that battlefield.
Well, the what's going on right now is a world revolution, right? It's a world revolution. They're revolting against capitalism worldwide. Look at BRICS. We're not the only ones who are fighting. And the thing is that revolution is actually going out and talking about communism, even when it's a threat. Like Trump is not the only one that's threatened communists with jail time. If you look at while Biden was in office, do you know how many communists and anti-fascists have been disappeared? Like under Biden, like there's like I've heard of 200 people. They don't know where they are at, and that is
Yeah.
scary. But the fact is that you're revolting right now, and you don't even know it.
Well, yeah, and I understand my place here, and that's why too I'm like, you know what? Like I was when I first was like really being educated about Marxism and whatnot and all that, I was like, I'm gonna be like an undercover Marxist. I'm gonna pretend that I'm not, but I'm gonna support like these causes and stuff. And then I realized I was like, no, like especially as like a white man, and I don't know how you feel about identity politics and different levels of but I genuinely believe in intersectionality, so I do feel like I have more privilege than a lot of people to put my face out here. Um, so yeah, I do understand that point, which is why I try to talk in a non-violent reformist way, because yeah, obviously if I sit here and call for violent revolution, I'm gonna get targeted immediately.
So the thing is that you can word what you're saying properly by referencing history. That's all you have to do is reference history. You don't have to come out and say, "I want a violent revolution." But the truth is that like um, reform basically feeds into the system. Like they want you. It's what is the vote? Like what's the whole thing about the lesser of two evils and Kamala and this last election? It was reform. The reason why a lot of Democrats are pissed off is because they're terrified of revolution and they know it's coming and they want to reform the system. And a lot of Democrats believe in liberalism, believe in capitalism, and they believe that, well, if they can just reform it, then it won't exploit them as much as it is. That's delusional. It's continuing to exploit you. And the thing is that this is violence. Like people, especially the Democrats, because they've used Martin Luther King like Jesus. But think about this, like, okay, so Martin Luther King is the Jesus of the Democrats, and Jesus, the Palestinian, is their token for the Republicans. But they both tokenize both to basically say, oh, you need to be peaceful. You need to be peaceful, except for the enemies I tell you to go against. That's the whole point. And our government and our systems are literally violence. It's violence against gay people. It's violence against children. It's violence against Black people and Indigenous people. It's violence against the world. The whole world is suffering because of America. So to want to reform that violence and say, well, I'm not going to I'm not going to talk about violence when they're enacting violence is doing as a service to all the people that violence is enacted against. So if you believe that your voice is important as a gay man, a white gay man, you should stand up for the Black people who are being shot by the cops. That's political violence. That's terrorism. That is the definition of terrorism is political violence. That is terrorism. They're enacting terrorism against the Black community, about against the Indigenous community. Water defenders, indigenous water defenders are literally trying to defend our water, their water, everybody's water, and they're being brutalized by the cops. That's
Mhm.
violence. But not just the brutalization by the cops, but the fact that the water is being poisoned is violence against us. The fact that plastics is in every single human body on earth and including in our brains and in our testicles and our ovaries, that's violence against
Mhm.
humanity. So when you say, I'm only going to enact self defense, this is the point. This is the moment that you're supposed to be enacting self defense because they have already enacted violence against us.
Okay, so the last point here, because we got to wrap it up, but
Sorry, I
uh,
know I talk a lot.
no, it's fine. I like to listen. I like to talk too. I I see a very careful navigation going forward for working class people and the whatever revolution's going to happen. And that is the liberals, that is the moderates, and not the politicians. I'm talking about the working class liberals and moderates and Democrats who they're on board with the gay stuff, the intersectionality stuff, right? And that's, again, they've been, according to you, like propagandized by the Democrats to as the good cop. This is like the savior. They're going to be the ones to give us ensure gay marriage stays legal and to give us back Roe v. Wade or whatever token problem they're going to use. Um, but they are genuinely pro-capitalist because they think it's the best system humanity's seen. Um, and how many people have flourished in this system versus feudalism, whatnot. So I worry that the left movement and the liberals who generally support these things are gonna face a navigating problem, and leftists are just gonna call them basically fascists. That's
Yep.
not gonna like bring them to our movement at all. They're gonna see us as crazy communists. Obviously, if you go far enough right, like you're already just lost to white nationalism and fascism. So I'm not even trying to reach those people, but I do think it's important to get the moderates. I think we would fail unless we got the moderates as part of the movement.
Moderates are the libertarians. They're not the Democrats. The Democrats are far right. They're middle right, and then you have the fascists. So we're talking about the ones who are who know that they are for fascism and literally call themselves Zionists and Nazis. They identify as that. But the libertarians are middle. The Republicans, or sorry, the Democrats are actually middle right. So
Wait, hold on. Let me clarify that because the Democrats I'm talking about are Democrats that want free education, they want free healthcare, they want climate change resolutions. So to lump them in as like farther right than a libertarian doesn't feel quite right to me. And maybe this is just the cultural versus economic thing.
that's the point is culturally so culturally Democrats, so the thing is that Democrats, it depends, it's not all, so we can't lump them all together, but some
Right.
Democrats are actually for liberation where some are just using it, they're 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 using the rhetoric to seem good. So the thing about Republicans and Democrats that they have in common is moral superiority. They want to seem like they're good people, but they don't want to do anything about it. So they'll, if it risks their family, if it risks their life, if it even risks their ability to make money, they won't do anything. They'll drop like flies in the revolution. They'll be like, nope, I'm totally for capitalism and I'm for Trump. So those are the people that among the Democrats that you really can't trust, the ones that everybody calls allies, the ones that basically drop out of any revolutionary activist movement. You see this with a lot of the liberals who voted for Kamala and are mad at the Palestinian and the boycott of her vote. They're pissed at her, and so they're like, "Well, screw all Palestinians and screw gay people on blah blah blah. I'm just going to basically take care of myself." That's individualistic, right? And that is very much like a Republican, because Republicans, and that's not all Republicans, because some Republicans are farmers. So that's where we need to look at the difference and not label them Republican, Democrat, liberal, or conservative, and actually get to the root and be like, okay, so you're a Trump supporter. Do you like, don't start off with like, oh, you're a racist. Be like, okay,
Right.
so what do you think about economically? Why do you hate, like, why are you against gay people? And actually talk to them. And some of that is deconstruction. They have to deconstruct. Um, MAGA and Trump supporters and Republicans need to just deconstruct either culturally, or they have to deconstruct financially, or both financial policies, or both. Same with Democrats. there's a lot of Democrats that are actually anti-gay, like anti-black or racist, and they're covert racist. So these are things where you have to deconstruct with them and actually understand where their mind is actually at. And that's where I'm talking about where activists have to understand language so that they can talk to these people, because the proletariat is the masses. It's not just people who are educated or left, right? It's everybody. So that includes the racists, and
Right.
they have to deconstruct why are people neo-Nazis? Why are they neo-Nazis? Because they've been educated to believe those same ideologies as, say, somebody who is a neoliberal Democrat. A neoliberal Democrat may come to your face and be like, "Yeah, I was pro Black Lives Matter," but in their home with their best friends, they could be like calling black people the N-word as a joke and be like, "Well, I can do it because my black friend told me to, or I can do it because he told me I could." That How are they different than Trump supporters at that point? That's the point. Is you have to stop buying into this division that has been created by the Republicans and Democrats, and actually start seeing people as people and start talking to them as a proletariat, and deconstructing the indoctrination that the empire has indoctrinated them by. And once you start deconstructing these imperialist ideas, then we can get to the root of them being just the proletariat.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I've said it a couple times, but I definitely agree with you on the dialogue part and the discussion part, and that's like my whole thing. So yeah, I think that's a good place to maybe wrap it up as an end. In fact, I wrote a paper last semester on this exact thing. Like this, I called it unsocial solidarity, and essentially seeking out the working class, even purposefully seeking out the racist or the homophobe, and meeting them at the working class grounds and finding
Yes.
common ground. So yeah, I think it's probably a good place to end. If you have any other last statements or anything, then feel free. But
No, that's good.
cool. Well, I definitely appreciate you coming on and educating me. That's all you did this whole time. No, I'm just kidding. But you did. You did. I learned a lot of cool things, so I appreciate it.
Right on.
All right. You take care.
But